Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Ready, Set, Go, What is your capacity to scale? Thank you for taking the time today to participate, and we're going to aim to be really efficient in our presentation. There will be a time for question and answers at the end, and we anticipate that the presentation will be about 30 minutes long. My name is Ashley Wilkins, and I'm a research associate that's part of the Pathways to Results project at the Office of Community College Research and Leadership. And I'm here with my co-host, Mark, but I will let him introduce himself. Oh, looks like maybe Mark is on mute, so maybe I will go ahead and introduce him. Mark is our project coordinator for the Transformative Change Initiative at the OCCRL as well. And today we are joined by our presenter, Heather Fox, who's a project coordinator for the Transformative Change Initiative within OCCRL. But before we start, I just want to share a few logistical details with you. This webinar is being recorded, so we will email you a link to today's webinar recording and the slides when they're posted to the OCCRL website next week. And from that link, you'll be able to access and download the slides and an audio recording. So please feel free to sit back and relax. And if you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to email myself or Mark. Our emails are listed up on the slide there, or chat to us in the questions bar or the chat screen on the right side of your screen. I think I've put everyone on mute to minimize background noise, but if you notice that you are not on mute, please make sure that you are so that we can fully hear our presenter, Heather. And finally, at any point during the webinar, you may write questions or comments in the questions or chat bar on the side of your screen. And like I said before, we'll address questions at the end of the presentation. So, but please feel free to submit them as they come up, and we'll talk about them at the end. All right, so let's get started. OCCRL is very pleased to be able to host this webinar and want to go ahead and welcome Heather, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to be able to come and talk with you today. I'm going to try to be very efficient with my time, so if there is questions that you have, feel free to put them in the chat box or to contact me afterwards. I would be more than happy to talk with you or talk through any of the topics that I covered today. So here's a list of what I'm hoping to cover with you over the next about 20 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about transformative change and specifically about the Transformative Change Initiative. I'm going to share the guiding principles for scaling transformative change. I'm going to talk with you about and preview for you the newest tool we have in our toolkit, which is a Scaling Innovation Self-Assessment Readiness tool. And then we're going to leave time at the end after my presentation for questions. So I want to start just by talking about OCCRL. So both Pathways to Results and the Transformative Change Initiative are projects within OCCRL, or the Office of Community College Research and Leadership. We are a group of researchers and evaluators who work together to try to create enhanced outcomes for both youth and adults who are transitioning in and through college and into employment as well. We have 3 strains of research that we do. We look at pathways and programs of study. This is where both the Transformative Change Initiative and Pathways to Results live. We also look at career and college readiness, including K through 12, college readiness programs, and we also have transfer and college completion. The most well-known project in that would be our credit for when it's due, and that is a reverse transfer project. I'm with the Transformative Change Initiative, so that's where most of my comments for today will reside. Our project is looking at supporting community colleges through creating resources and gathering up information from evaluators and researchers in the field about scaling up innovations that improve outcomes for students, but also improve the programs, the organizations, and education overall. So one of the words that gets used a lot, in addition to transformative change, is the idea of innovation. And so we wanted to start, when we talk about this, to give people a framework for what we mean by innovation. And so there's a couple really key things to that, and I want to encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, to read the Open Book of Social Innovation. I have that cited here, and that is where this particular model comes from. It influenced how we think about innovation pretty strongly. One of the key things about innovation, or the way that innovation happens, is it's not linear, but there is always somewhere it's rooted in a need, a problem, an issue that needs to be addressed, that's recognized by people, and that they try to find a solution for it. So they call these prompts and proposals. So there's a prompt, that's something that happens that makes you realize that there's a need or a problem, and then proposals to try to address it. And out of those proposals come a lot of different ways to address it. Often innovations are actually packaged together in these proposals. So we use words and we talk about things like enhanced retention or prior learning as if they're all very separate, but in practice they're often done together. Those prototypes, as they call them, where they try to find ways, get tested. We sometimes call this piloted, sometimes quite intentionally, sometimes in small numbers, sometimes in really large numbers. But there's some evidence of enhancement, of success, they build into something stronger. And this is where we start talking about sustaining. And one of the problems with the word sustaining, or one of the issues that comes up, is people often think of sustaining as holding still. And so it's really important to understand that maintaining something is different than sustaining it. And with innovation, sustaining is still growth. You're still developing, learning, moving towards a future with a new change and complexity involved. And that leads to scaling. So if something's working and working well, and you're able to develop it and work it over time, the next natural step is to scale it, to have a greater impact. And once you've done that, or that's done often in multiple different places, that can lead to systematic change. So that talks about it like it's a somewhat linear process, and I think we idealize it in that way. But we know that sometimes these things actually go back and forth. We're working on something, there's a change, we start piloting something new, so we move back to prototyping. A new problem arises, or the problem changes, and we may go all the way back to prompts. We may have a system mandate that actually pushes the idea of scaling and change the other direction. And so it's important to understand that while we need all these concepts, that it's not a purely linear concept. And so when we talk about transformative change, the big concept for us is that we want you to understand that it has to be change that doesn't or that supports new access and equity. It's not transformative if it continues the same educational outcomes as we would expect before. So that's a really key thing, is that transformative change should improve access and equity. I wanted to address really quickly, because we're doing this this webinar together as Pathways to Results and Transformative Change, want the connection between these two programs, and really the connection between the idea of scaling and any continuous improvement process. Pathways, which is particularly interested in issues of equity, if you're looking at a program of study and the idea of inquiry to try to find a way to improve it so that there's better and more equitable outcomes for your students, you may very well, and I would expect in a lot of cases, you'll find an innovation in fixing that creates a system change. And it might be a small system change, but that system change, or that need for that change, is probably not small. And so we like to encourage people as they're thinking about continuous improvement, as they're thinking about making changes in their programs, of how could this be used in other programs, in other colleges, and other places, and in essence, how could it be scaled? A change is wonderful when it impacts a small number of students in a really positive way, but when we can grow that, we can grow its impact, and that's really what scaling is about. So I just want to give you briefly a little idea of where we got the information that I'm going to share today. So we've been working to integrate both what's already in the research, what we know from our evaluation and from other evaluations, and then what we saw in practice. And we really heavily reflect what we've learned from practice. So we have a set of strategy briefs, so we've worked with consortiums to understand specific strategies that they have found innovative and are hoping to scale, and have written briefs on them. We've had learning labs where we've brought in hundreds of leaders together across the country to talk about and look at things like scaling and sustainability for the initiatives that are happening through TACT. We work with a group of evaluators called the Evaluation Collaborative. There's about 150 of them all together, really closely with about 40 of them or 50 of them, to understand what are they learning from their evaluations and how does it reflect or not reflect what we're hearing in the research or from practice, and trying to find a balance with that. We've of course looked at all the published research in the area and published evaluations. We also, when we came to the point of understanding we needed principles and having a draft set of principles, pulled together a work groups of about 60 members who helped us. These are all practitioners, mostly leaders in the field that we had recognized as leaders and that others had recognized as leaders, that we brought together to tell us, inform us, what we could do with these principles, how we could better write them, whether they were the right principles, and they really did have a huge influence on the set of principles that we ended with. In fact, we ended up with a different number of principles and different focus for some of our principles based on their input. This is the framework we came up with, and I love to share this because this is such a pretty picture. And one of the things that I want to talk about just briefly here is the idea of spreading and enduring. So one of the principles is to spread and endure, and this is really what we consider to be scaling. So spread is about moving its impact, greater impact, more people, more places, more ways. Endure is that idea of having the strength to continue on, to have the funding and resources necessary in order to make it. Altogether, we have 8 guiding principles, which I have here on the next slide for you. The bright teal words are what we kind of consider to be our core concept of the principle, and then each of the statements underneath it is the principle statement. I'm not going to go into depth on these today, but there's tons of information on our website about these. We also have tools that go with each of these principles to help for developing that particular principle in the area that you want to strengthen. And so when we created that toolkit, we started talking about, well, there's a lot here. There are 8 different principles, and they're very big concepts like leadership and storytelling and dissemination. Now we've created these great tools, and people could use these tools, but where would they start, and how would they know where to start? And so that's what transitioned us into our newest tool, which is the focus of today, and that's the Scaling Innovation Self-Assessment Readiness Tool. And I will go on record as saying I suspect that title will change. Hopefully one of you wonderful people listening to this could help. Maybe you have an idea for what would be a better title for this assessment. What we wanted from this assessment is to be able to help you recognize what your capacity is to scale an innovation overall, that particular innovation. Where should you build your capacity to scale? So where's some development needed? Where's some focus needed? Where do you need to pull those tools out of the toolkit and say, we need to work on this. We need to find a way to be stronger in this area. And then, of course, there are also likely areas you're very strong in that you can really capitalize in order to scale. And one that's kind of a couple important things about the different principles is they're not all equal at the same time. And there's also no two principles that are more important than others. There's no linear line to the principle, so it's not like, oh, if I figure this one out, next I do this one. They all have equal value, and so some of this is just helping you recognize what ones have the most value right now, and how can I both build the ones I need for the future and use what I have already to be able to move towards scaling and innovation. I want to tell you that we have just now finished the first version, or what we're calling the preview version of this tool. As attendees of this webinar, you'll get the first peek. We are also sharing it at our upcoming events in November with the evaluators who were there, so to get the practitioner and evaluator voice in this. And we'll revise it based on feedback that we receive from you, from other people in the field, and as well as the evaluators that are working with these projects. So I would hope to have the next version of this tool would be ready towards the end of the year. But we didn't want people to have to wait. We think the tool and its items are useful where they are, and that we can continue to develop it like anything else. We have the ability to benefit from continuous improvement. So very briefly, I'm going to go into 3 guiding principles, 3 of the 8, a little more in depth. For each one, I'm going to point out just a couple key points that we want you to know about it. We're going to give you a quick example from practice and show you a couple items from the self-assessment tool related to that principle. So the self-assessment tool is wrapped around these guiding principles. So each guiding principle has a brief that's shared with you in the tool, and then you have just 4 items that you put into a scale and that you use as the self-assessment. So let's start with leadership. So there's leadership's guiding principle, and I won't read it for you, but I want you to think about leadership kind of holistically. We don't think of it, when we say leadership, a lot of times people go immediately to vice presidents, presidents, deans. They do it by title. This is not leadership by title. This is leadership by action. Who is leading the innovation? Who, and a lot of times it's whom. The idea that there's a superhero who comes in and saves the day is kind of more of a myth than a reality. What it usually is a group of people working hard together can support and lead in innovation. And if it's distributed among a group of people, then you're more likely also to see it be sustainable, because if one person leaves and they're key to the innovation, it often doesn't succeed. So I'm going to quickly play a quick excerpt from one of our podcasts for you on leadership.
We're collaborative in nature, figuring out, what is a vision, and so really kind of building a collaborative vision for both the proposal, but also trying to figure out.
My apologies there. We seem to have, that didn't seem to work well. My apologies. So I'll move on here to the leadership tool, or the part of the tool that talks about leadership. So this is how the tool works. It's a fillable PDF, and at each one of them, like I said, had 4 items. This is 2 of the 4 items. So you can see it asks you, to what extent do the following statements reflect your initiative? Leaders advocate for access, equity, and opportunity for all students. Leaders have a deep understanding of existing organizational structures and lines of authority, and use this understanding to create an evidence and performance-based architecture for the future. We have in the PDF, the calculation structure. So you just select, is it never true, rarely true, sometimes true, usually true, or always true, and it actually will calculate a score for you. And then there's a scale on the bottom that'll tell you what your current capacity is based on these very general items and that score. So I'm going to move on to talking about storytelling. Storytelling, I think, is something that we kind of naturally get. This is something that we use a lot in education. It's what we use to teach our own children. And it's about sharing the complexity of the problem, the complexity of the context that people are in, and engaging people at multiple levels. We often include in them very intellectual engagement, but sometimes also emotional engagement, and engaging people who are potential students, potential users, supporters, employers, so a lot of different levels in that way too. The really cool thing about storytelling, or the really important thing about it though, is getting the right person who has the right story to reach that targeted audience. And often that's a lot of different people, and it can also mean engaging a lot of different voices, different cultures, different roles in the organization, different roles in the innovation, to really be able to share that. One of the consortiums we've worked with, Demand, has done this wonderfully. So I'm going to attempt, and I hope that this works better, to show you a brief video that they've created to illustrate storytelling.
Let me tell you a little bit about what the Demand Project means to Fort Peck. Because the college's mandate for academic requirements, they take programs like truck driving. They would take a 12-week program that could be done in 3 weeks. Now we're able to, through this initiative, to shorten things up, meet the industry needs, and get going. And that's what we've been able to do.
I started working about 4 or 5 days after I passed my driving exam. So I wanted to hurry up and get a job really soon and put it to use and get some experience under my belt, because that way I have a lot of job opportunities as long as you have experience.
So you can see in that example that they're using students to tell their own stories too, and we really encourage that, because storytelling is really about showing and sharing the voice of the initiative and what is happening. I would like to encourage you. Demand has, as you probably noticed in the previous slide, a lot of different videos. So if you're looking for inspiration for how to tell stories and how to share those stories with people, I would definitely go see Demand's website and the various stories that they have shared. They're quite moving, and they're really great examples. So I'm going to show here that there are just 2 of the items in storytelling, so you can see that they're very similar to some of the things that you've seen or that you saw with leadership. There's the same type of a scale, the same type of items, and these items show up for each principle, and they also will show up, as I'll show you later, at the very end of the tool, so that you can see what the overall score is for each of the principles and for all the principles combined. And the last one I want to talk about, just briefly, is networks. Networks is something else that we know works, we know is important. We know that we can't do innovation by ourselves. We know that we need expertise and knowledge and resources that come from other people. But a lot of times, because we are so busy doing the innovation, we don't think about how to intentionally network. We network almost happenstance or in short bursts, like at conferences or with maybe just those groups that we know that we can conference with. And one of the key points here in being able to network efficiently is to be able to understand that your needs need to reflect that person's that you're networking with, or your organization or innovation needs to reflect the vision of the organization that you want to work with, and it needs to be mutually beneficial. So let me just briefly try to show this, see if this one works.
First of all, critically, you need to share your overall direction and vision, and then also be willing to share and to adapt or even sometimes change as you continue to develop and expand your scope and your vision. Networks that are critical, those critical networks are ones that really can do that with you. So in other words, together you're better than you were independently.
And that's Marianne Krismer. She led the H2P consortium, and she talks frequently about how important it was for her to start developing networks from day 2. She actually said that it was about a third of her job was working on building the right connections for the consortium to be successful, and we think that's reflected pretty heavily in the need for networks and scaling as well. And again, just a preview of what it looks like in the self-assessment tool. Each of these assessments is just 4 items long, and the thought of that is to allow people to hopefully work with groups in filling out the assessment so that you could have a conversation and maybe come to a consensus with the answer. And more than 4 we thought might be overwhelming, but we would love to hear from people who use this tool what you find. And this is the summary that shows up at the end of the tool. So like I mentioned before, you'll get a score that's between 0 and 4 for each of the principles, and then an overall score that tells you kind of where you are capacity-wise across the principles. We really want to highlight, though, that this is not meant to be judgmental, and they're not all equal at any given time. So it might be okay if, for example, you're not currently strong in capacity to disseminate. If you're early in the development of the innovation and you're really focused on developing leadership and networks, it is a tool that we would encourage you to use over. So maybe at the beginning you would use it, and then you'd come back and use it again maybe 6 months later, maybe a year later, to see where you've come. And see these numbers change. So seeing a low number doesn't mean that it should be your highest priority, and seeing a high number doesn't mean that you won't still want to build capacity in it, but these should be able to give you the tool, the numbers, to have that conversation and make it work for your particular innovation. So I just want to remind everyone that this was very high level and very fast. I feel like I threw a ton of information out there. On our website, we have a lot more depth, and we can provide a lot more information about the guiding principles, about the toolkit, about innovative strategies and podcasts that tell you from the mouth of the people doing the work, how they did it, why they did it, what was important to them. So there's a lot more resources there, and you guys will get the tool before it even goes up on the website as our preview audience for everyone who came to the webinar. I just want to thank everyone who has supported the work that we're doing and the whole TCI team. In particular, I want to thank our funders, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Joyce Foundation, and the Lumina Foundation. And I'm going to hand it back over to Ashley.
Thank you, Heather, for that great presentation. It's really helpful to information, I think a really helpful tool. So as you can probably see, we're now at the end of our webinar where we have time to answer some questions. So this would be a good time to, if you have a question, submit it through the chat box or through the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll wait just a moment to see if any come in. Otherwise, we will sign off a few minutes early and say goodbye. Looks like, Heather, we have a question about the website. Do you know, can you share what the website is? Is that on one of the slides?
It is. Let me just roll back to the slide. Right there at the bottom, the http occrl.illinois.edu/project/TCI will bring you right to what we call our Knowledge Center. That's the Transformative Change Initiatives page. There's also an amazing amount of information. I think we have something in the area of about 600 products on OCCRL's website as well. So I encourage people to come to TCI's page, but also to explore around and look at the wonderful things that Pathways to Results has to offer, that the Pathways Resource Center has to offer, that Credit When It's Due has produced. There's a lot of breadth there.
Great, thank you. Thanks for showing that. I know it'd probably be kind of hard to write down really fast. It looks like we have another question here. So for networks, are you assessing the act of networking or results of having networked?
A little bit of both, but primarily we're looking at what are kind of the key components, so these principles that exist in places that successfully scale. We are moving into, so a lot of this has been pulling from other research and what we know from existing projects. TACT now is reaching a point where we can start to see it in practice and start using this for our own evaluation and our own research. So it's a little bit of both. I'm not sure if that fully answers the question, but I think we need to both know whether it's existing and to what extent, and then also what the benefits and how that works.
Heather, so will there be presentations on this information in the future at like AEA or other presentations that you know of?
Unfortunately, no. We actually just got through. I think I've been traveling pretty nonstop for the last about 6 weeks. We are doing a couple events for evaluators in November in conjunction with AEA. I do have a presentation there, but we're focusing in on methods used for program of study assignment that we've used through our evaluations, which is TACT related but not TCI related. And I do not believe there's going to be anyone presenting at ASH on it. I suspect we'll see another run, or we'll go around and do more presentations again in the spring. But we just did like 6 of them. And unfortunately, the timing of this doesn't support that.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that's all the questions that have come in so far. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time and attention today. Please remember that we're going to post the slides and a recording of this webinar to the website, the OCCRL website, next week. But you're also more than welcome to contact Heather Fox or OCCRL with any questions or feedback about today's webinar. So have a good day, and thanks again, everyone.